Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the side event called Engage to the Private Sector and a key driver for NDC commitments in food, agriculture, water, and finance. I would like to invite to Andrea Camponogara, UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center Global Lead, to share the welcome remarks. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, not needed. Welcome. This is an important event supported by the Regional Collaboration Center for Latin America in Panama. I would like to welcome and thanks our panelists for the precious information that they're going to provide us, but also would like to thank the participants, and I would like to invite the participants to engage with the panelists later on in question and answer and be provocative, so to ignite the discussion after all. Few elements that I would like to highlight. As I said, this is one of the many efforts of the Regional Collaboration Center for Latin America to foster communication, collaboration, engagement between the public sector, so the governmental representative, and the private sectors. I think it's important at this stage that we are entering the next phase of the NDC, where countries are required to enhance ambition, and to implement the NDC. Is important to inject optimism in the process. I think we need to move away from the long-lasting discussion on challenges and gaps, but to look at what is happening on the ground. There is a lot of successful initiatives, which are implemented on the ground, that are addressing parties' mandates, both in terms of climate change and sustainable development. And these initiatives are not really visible. And the majority of these initiatives are implemented by private sectors. This is really important if you think about, because they will contribute significantly if reflected in the next NDC cycle to increase ambition at the country level, at the regional level. It's one of the regional collaboration centers, priority for 2024 to keep on this, to keep the momentum, to keep on fostering this collaboration between private sector and the public sectors. Where also in the private sector we include financial institutions, because finance is an issue to be addressed. Also, on the finance side, there is a lot of initiatives that are trying to facilitate mobilization of resources that need to be brought up to surface. And this is, again, one of the objectives of this event. I think I'm going to stop here. Because, and I would like to take this occasion to thank our regional lead in Latin America, Fabiana Rodriguez and Nadia González, for organizing this work, and all the other panelists that are, again, contributing to this event. One last remarks. I have participated a few days ago in an NDC event, and I would like to emphasize what I said there once. We need to regionalize approaches. The needs are country-specific. So we need to turn upside down the usual refrain, thinking globally, acting locally. It should be now the other way around. So we have to think in locally. We have to strategize, to develop our strategy addressing what is the specific need of the countries, of the local communities in the country, and we have to act globally to provide sufficient support in terms of human resources, in terms of capacity building, in terms of training, and in terms of mobilization of financial resources to support country efforts in the region, in their territory. And with that, again, thank you very much.
Many thanks, Andrea, for your opening remarks. Now I would like to present the setting and the scenes. Next. Recognition that the moving towards 1.5 degrees Celsius requirement accelerate the action in this critical decade. By all parties to revisit, to estrange the 2030 targets in the NDCs, because currently we are ahead to the latest 2.4 degrees temperature rise. In this stark contrast to IPCC recommends the reductions of 43% for 1.5 degrees Celsius or 27 degrees, 27% for 2 degrees Celsius target. Next slide, please. Regarding to the synthesis report 2023, the information from 168 latest available NDCs representing the 195 parties to the Paris Agreement include the 153 new updates NDCs communicates by 118 parties recommended in the NDCs registry is September 25, 2023. From September 2022 to September 2023, a total of 20 parties have either updated or submitted new NDCs. These include Bahamas, Mexico, and Uruguay from the Latin America region. Next slide. Currently, national commitments NDCs are insufficient to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. We need significantly increase efforts to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. The latest NDCs imply an increase in global greenhouse gas emissions by 8.8% by 2030 compared to 2010. The ambitions for the 2030 has increased only suddenly compared to the latest year's NDC synthesis report. However, there are a strong possibility of global emissions peaking before 2030 if conditional components of NDC are implemented. They relies on increased financial resources, technology transfer, capacity building, and market-based mechanisms. Regarding to the action items, call for all countries to significantly increase their ambition levels in their NDCs, urgent development countries to provide accurate financial resource and technology transfer to developing countries, support capacity building efforts to help the countries implement their NDCs, explore market-based mechanisms to incentivize emission reductions and protect and conserve forested and other ecosystems to maximize their carbon sequestration potential. Next slide, please. The key findings of NDC Synthesis Report 2023, there is a better quality information presented in the NDCs. Most parties have economy-wide targets in their NDCs, and interlink and co-benefits of mitigation and adaptation are now better understood. Also, in the context of the economic diversification and just transition. NDC are better aligned with a broader long-term and low emissions development goals and a shift of carbon neutrality. non-stakeholders and their stakeholders are becoming more involved in the NDC planning and implementation process. The parties are increasingly recognizing gender integrating to enhance ambitions and effectiveness of their climate action. Next slide, please. And for the last slide, you can observe ongoing submission process about the progress the global stocktake. Every 5 years, new guidance for NDCs and each year there will be synthesis report outline to expected implementation periods for the NDCs, and finally monitoring of the NDC through the BTR. Thank you so much. I would like to pass the floor to Kelly. Welcome to Kelly, who is the moderator for the next panel. Thank you.
Hello? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Nadia, for giving us that fantastic context. I'm so excited to be here to moderate this panel today. We know what we need to do. Nadia just told us about the ambition we need to increase. But there's not only just an ambition gap, there's an implementation gap. And in the work we've done to really analyze not what the NDCs say for agriculture in Latin America and the Caribbean, but actually how action is moving on the ground. We talked to the focal points from Ministries of Agriculture in charge of NDC implementation, from Ministries of Environment, and actors around. And there's a ton of policies in place. We have policies, strategies, and plans. What we don't necessarily have is the how. How do we get there? And that's why this conversation today, and I'm so grateful to Andrea, Fabiana, and Nadia for pulling this together. The conversation today is really about how we do that. And one of the key actors for doing that is certainly the private sector. The resources in the public sector will never be enough. But we know also that only 4% of global climate finance is being directed to the agriculture, forestry, and other land use systems. But emissions from the sector are significantly higher. And emissions from agriculture in Latin America and the Caribbean are about 25% of global emissions from agriculture. And the finance coming to Latin America and the Caribbean in agriculture is much lower than going to Africa and Asia. So we have a conundrum, really. It's a big challenge on our hands. And even worse is that a lot less of this money is going down to smallholders in the field. About 0.8% of global climate finance is going down to smallholders. And we know from a study published actually last week that smallholders are actually investing $368 billion in adaptation. So they are taking climate action, they are responding. And we know that a lot of the adaptation actions in agriculture have synergies with mitigation. Maybe we're not going to quantify it at the very smallholder level. There's a lot of data challenges in agriculture. But we know that investing in climate action in agriculture provides multiple benefits, and we need to find a way to scale this. So I'm very excited to welcome to the stage today Vice Minister of the Ministry of Agriculture of Uruguay, Francisco Minuche. Please come on up. Natasha Santos, who is, let me get your title right, Head of Global Stakeholder Affairs and Strategic Partnerships and Vice President of Bayer. And Ms. Sandra Guzman, who is a low-carbon development and climate finance expert and the founder of the climate finance group for Latin America and the Caribbean. So excited to have you here today for this discussion. And we're going to start off with a question for each of you. First, I'll turn to Vice Minister Minuche. He's going to speak in Spanish, and I will also do simultaneous translation, so bear with us there. Vice Minister, we know that Ecuador is doing a lot on the ground to address climate change in agriculture and reduce the carbon footprint from the sector. Can you tell us a little bit about the role that you see for the private sector in helping Ecuador to meet its climate goals and the better practices that you're seeing on the ground that can be scaled up Entonces, viceministro, por favor, si nos pueden contar un poco sobre el rol que el sector privado puede jugar en ayudar a lograr las metas climáticas que tiene el Ecuador y también algunas de las prácticas sostenibles para reducir emisiones que se pueden escalar.
Muy buenos días. Bueno, yo entiendo el inglés, pero me hace un poco difícil hablarlo. Muchas gracias a la invitación, el ICA, las Naciones Unidas, Nadia, que me estuvo siempre escribiendo. Gracias por esta invitación. Bueno, las acciones que puede tener el Ministerio de Agricultura, la parte pública con la privada es muy importante, tanto a nivel nacional como los gobiernos locales y la empresa privada. ¿Va traduciendo línea por línea?
Yeah. Good morning to all of you. I do understand English, but it's a little challenging for me to speak. And I'll just say he's only been on the job for about 2 weeks, so we'll cut him some slack here. Thank you to the convention and to Nadia for setting this up and inviting me to participate. So we know that public-private partnerships are really very important, not only at the national level, but as we go down to the state and local, the regional and local level.
Es muy importante esa interacción entre el gobierno nacional y el gobierno local y la empresa privada, ya que se puede articular muchas buenas acciones con buenas prácticas agrícolas desde la agricultura. Para mí es muy importante que el agricultor, los farmers, todos los productores puedan entender la importancia del cambio climático que estamos viviendo hoy en día. Y es por eso que el Ministerio de Agricultura y la empresa privada ya están trabajando articuladamente para concientizar a los productores en este camino.
So this interaction between the national level government, the local level government, and the private sector is really important, especially in articulating to understand these better agricultural practices and helping farmers to really understand the importance not only of the adaptation, but the mitigation actions that can be taken. And the Ministry of Agriculture is working with the private sector to help articulate and raise awareness of this issue on the ground.
Las formas en que estamos trabajando con estos sectores es que haya la articulación directa con los mercados, que los productores sepan que pueden evitar esa intermediación y tener un valor económico mejorado para que poder incentivar a esta producción sostenible.
So one of the ways we're doing this is better directly linking farmers to markets so that they can have a better income and improve their practices and getting that additional economic benefit of basically cutting out the intermediary.
Es importante que los agricultores sepan manejar las buenas prácticas agrícolas y prácticas ancestrales. Hoy en día casi ningún agricultor tiene su propia soberanía. ¿Qué quiero decir? Casi ningún agricultor sabe manejar la luna. Nadie sabe que hoy, en este momento, estamos en luna menguante. Cuándo cosechar los productos que son bajo la tierra y los que están sobre la tierra. Cuándo tienen mayor cantidad de agua, cuándo tienen mayor cantidad de energía, cuándo tienen mayor nutrientes. Entonces, ya casi el agricultor no sabe por qué el hormiguero forma la horqueta, porque sabe que se avecina un invierno fuerte de lluvias.
So it's really important that the farmers take advantage of these better agricultural practices and the ancestral practices that have always been used to help them manage changes, including changes in the way that the moon, the changes in the moon when they have more water, energy, and nutrients, you know, what the different biodiversity, he mentioned an example of something ants do, but I don't know the word in English, I'm sorry, and what these signs are telling them about how to improve or adjust their practices.
Entonces, todas estas prácticas ancestrales son importantes para concientizar a los agricultores a que la naturaleza habla, que el suelo está vivo, que tenemos vida. Al momento de usar fertilizantes no orgánicos, que son convencionales, hemos roto el eslabón principal de la vida, que son los microorganismos. Y sin esa vida que naturalmente desintegra las piedras, la materia orgánica y la da en alimento para las plantas, y las plantas hacen un trueque natural de la vida, devolviéndole en azúcares para que los microorganismos sigan viviendo, eso de ahí ha desaparecido. Entonces el agricultor ya no entiende lo esencial del trabajo en el campo y se vuelve totalmente dependiente de la industria. Esa industria ha logrado captar a todos los agricultores, los ha secuestrado y ya no tenemos al momento es difícil cambiarle ese paradigma al agricultor para que regrese a estas prácticas sustentables y poder disminuir el cambio climático.
So we really need to revive these ancestral practices and, understand and listen when nature speaks. The soil is alive, and when we overuse these agrochemicals, it's really affecting the microorganisms and microbiota in the soils. We need to understand these interactions and work to reduce or optimize the use of these agrochemicals. It can be difficult to break these existing patterns, but we need to return to some of this to help address climate change in Ecuador.
Entonces, para concluir esto, el Ministerio de Agricultura trabaja con la empresa privada, con los gobiernos locales, como por ejemplo en Pastaza, es la provincia más grande del Ecuador, que tiene una gran cantidad de Amazonía, y ahí trabajamos con muchos proyectos pro Amazonía, y en el Ecuador, en el Ministerio de Agricultura, tenemos 10 proyectos favoreciendo con sellos, por ejemplo, de agricultura familiar campesina, buenas prácticas agrícolas, etcétera, donde con esto logramos a que los agricultores trabajen de esta forma conjunta y articulada y motivamos a la empresa privada a que sea una agricultura más sostenible, una ganadería más sostenible, y con eso pues articulamos una mejor forma.
So the Ministry of Agriculture works with the private sector especially in one of the largest provinces in Ecuador. ¿Cómo se llama?
¿Qué cosa?
La provincia.
Pastaza.
Pastaza, which has a significant portion of Amazon, and there they have a project called Pro Amazonia, where they're working with family and family and smallholder agriculture, good agricultural practices, and they're really articulating with the private sector to help ensure that we can reach more producers and reduce the emissions and the impact of climate change on the sector. Thank you so much, Vice Minister, for sharing that with us. I'd like to turn now to Natasha and hear a little bit about how you are engaging and at what levels. Are you working at the regional level? Are you working specifically in certain countries to design and implement climate action commitments, both in the short term, and then over your long-term strategy to help reduce emissions from the sector? Can you please share your experience?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us, for convening us here. It's a pleasure to be in. It's almost over, the COP, so it's a bit, I don't know how I feel yet, so I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm happy that I met a lot of people, and at least we find some like-minded challenges as well, and like-minded people that want to move things forward in terms of action. So to your question, well, I have a global role, so I lead our global partnership for Bahia Crop Science, the industry, in agriculture. So we are in the agricultural division. I focus on our agriculture business. And what we, as I think you mentioned, or someone mentioned at the beginning, what we are trying to apply is think global, but you have to act local, particularly in agriculture, because you have quite some different landscapes, cropping systems, nutrition needs, and so on and so forth. So the global strategy, to your question, we have announced it earlier this year in March, actually, that we will focus our entire strategy due to everything that we have been talking this week and in all the COPs. We're gonna focus all our strategy in what we are calling regenerative agriculture. And for us, we decided to position that way for two reasons, because we see opportunities for climate mitigation and for climate adaptation and for preservation in terms of biodiversity, water optimization, and all of that. So we decided that we want to look at the outcomes of things, of cropping systems. So regenerative agriculture for us, looking at 6 outcomes, looking at reduction of GHG emissions, of course, potential carbon sequestration where that's possible. For example, Brazil in soybean, we've been working with Embrapa and we see huge potential there. Water optimization, we are working in India in directed seeded rice. I'll mention a little bit about that project. Biodiversity preservation and conservation as well. water, I said water, social and economic benefits, and of course yields, right? So productivity. And then what we are doing is working in two kind of strategic pillars. We are looking at our own pipeline, our technologies, and thinking, well, does this in a cropping system contribute to those outcomes? All of them, some of them, again, depends on which country or cropping system we are talking about. And then are there other types of investment that we can do beyond our core business today, for example, crop fertility, so we're talking about fertilizers. Are there investments or partnership that we can foster to think about biological fertilizer in certain cropping system, always thinking about those outcomes. And why did Bayer, this big German multinational company that is very famous, I know, started to think that way? Why do we think this is strategic from a business and private sector point of view? I am Brazilian, I'm very purpose-driven, I love agriculture. My father is a farmer, so I want us to thrive. So I have my personal drive, but from a business point of view, it's because we believe this is the only way we can have a serious climate mitigation and adaptation strategy, but more important that our customers, who are the farmers, so if the farmers are not successful and buying our technologies, if the technologies don't work, they're not gonna buy anymore, because we work with R&D, very, let's say, prestige technology. So if it doesn't work, they're not gonna buy. So I need my customers, the farmers, to be resilient, to adapt to everything that is happening and to be successful. So if I don't accelerate that success and that resilience, my business is gonna die. I'm not gonna have a business in 10, 20, 30 years. So we see as a win-win opportunity. That's what I tell my board of management, and that's the discussion we have internally. It's a win-win opportunity. We can now clearly, transparently contribute to those environmental and socio-economic outcomes, and as well, that will be good for business resilience. So that's the mindset. And then what are we doing in practice? Of course, we are thinking about technologies. For example, we just launched it in the US, and we are bringing to Brazil something called Precision, which is a smart corn system, which looks at shorter corn, so from 7 feet to 5 feet. It's still very high, by the way. But what is the difference about that technology and that system? Not only there is inputs optimization, so less fertilizer, less pesticide, and water optimization, but it helps with standability. It has increased lodging and increased green snap, and it helps with sustainability. So the farmers don't lose yields because it's smaller in extreme weather conditions. You know, all those storms in the US that we see a lot. If you make it shorter, but you don't reduce the amount of seeds, the farmers can have increased adaptation. So that's very important to adaptation. Another thing that we are doing, and I'll stop here, we continue on the Q&A, we have the largest carbon farming, we are calling, platform in Brazil. We have 2,000 farmers. We needed to stop. We needed to ask some of our customers to not subscribe because we couldn't take all of the interest on the first years. But we have been working for 3 years in Brazil with a lot of partners, incentivizing from an agronomic point of view, from a data science point of view, so digital farming point of view, and from real incentivization, even certain payments, practices that we believe helps to reduce emission and improve soil health and carbon sequestration. We took 10 farmers of that program with Embrapa, and some universities, and we started doing that whole carbon framework methodology to adapt to tropical agriculture, because it's completely different from temperate agriculture. So together with Embrapa, it's third-party validated by Bureau Veritas, we have done the whole system, the whole cycle of soybean from planting, from the whole farming, from harvest, till we deliver to the elevator, so the traders. And we have seen, after 3 years of this project, we have seen reduction of emission of around 64%, on average soybean farming in Brazil. And we are very excited because ADM, which is a trader, now joined the project. They're gonna do the footprints from getting that soybean and delivering to Europe in this case. And we hope other comes in the system, and we unlock this as a value chain. We are learning a lot. We don't have time. Of course, it's not that we have 10 years, 20 years to learn, and we are trying to accelerate as much as possible through those partnerships. And from the private sector point of view, and I think all of us as a society, we need this to be as scale as possible and to be as transparent as possible and to be as understood as possible so this can be benchmarked to other farming systems. So let me stop here and we can continue on the Q&A as well.
Thanks, Natasha. So from your global program, you're finding different ways to actually get down to the field level, work with farmers in different kinds of systems and come up with solutions that work for them and really make the business case for you. Before I pass on to Sandra, do you have the KPIs for the amount of greenhouse gas reductions or increase in sequestration that you have as your global company goal? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I was saying it again. I was
just asking if you have the targets you set for reducing greenhouse gas emissions or increasing carbon sequestration.
Sorry. So two types of, we have our own, of course, operational upstream targets, as we have to. Every industry needs to reduce that environmental impact footprints, but as well the emission reduction. So we are looking at our upstream, our factories, our warehouse, so we are doing that. But I think the most exciting thing from a crop science point of view, our agriculture division, is that we have targets downstream, looking at our farmers and how we help them to adapt and mitigate climate change. So we have three targets. One is 30% reduction on GHG emissions on the cropping systems that we have technology that we are doing business in. So soybean in Brazil, in Argentina, rice in India. So we are helping our customers to reduce emission, and we have that quantitative target that we report against. And we have a reduction on environmental footprint. So we are looking at biodiversity, we are looking at soil health, but from an inputs optimization and from better inputs, from modern inputs as well. And here I'm talking about pesticides, fertilizers, and all of that. So we have worked and we are following a methodology done by a consortium of universities, European, North American, South Americans, and we have been, we put that target on our business. So we have an environmental footprint and we have a greenhouse gas emission reduction, so carbon, methane in the case of rice as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Now we'll turn to Sandra Guzman. When all the conversations, or many of the conversations here, are really revolving around finance. How do we drive in the investment and grants necessary to really move the needle where on the ground in agriculture, food, and water? Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective how the private sector could be involved in the implementation of these medium and long-term strategies focusing on on water, food, and ag, and how GFLAC contributes to this process?
Well, of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Nadia, Fabiana, for the opportunity to have here, to be here and to have this conversation. I would like to start probably like reflecting about when we talk about private sector, it's very important to characterize the private sector, because we tend to see this private sector as this entity, harmonized entity, but it's not the case. And we have to think in the needs, because when we talk about private sector, it's just a small farmer, or it can be like a huge company that is an agriculture producer. So I think this is very important because different entities are doing different things. But the question is to what extent they are doing this in collaboration with the public sector. And I think this is one of the critical elements that we have observed in the context of the, now that we are talking about the global stock take and what happened in the past and what needs to happen in the future. And one of the elements that we analyze is that the private sector is there at different levels, but they are not necessarily working towards the accomplishment of the NDCs, for instance. And this is because the governments are not necessarily designing these policy instruments in collaboration with the private sector. And this is a huge opportunity because we are going to start like this updating process. And if we want to be more like not only successful, but if we really want to transform the way that we are doing things, we have to engage every single entity in the design of these NDCs, of these national adaptation plans, because particularly for the sector, water, agriculture sector, it's very important to consider not only the reduction of emissions, but also the adaptation side of the story. So one of the other challenge that we observe is that it's very, very important to determine the needs. How much do we actually need to transform the sectors? Because this is not only about a project that will change everything in 1 year. It's how we change the approach, how we change the perspective and the design of these projects. So NDCs, national adaptation plans, have to be in synchronization with national plans that are not only like 1 year basis, but are long-term strategies. And here we need to analyze how much do we need, how much can we pay through the public sector, because these incentives at the end of the day are very important. And then how much do we actually need, for instance, from the international cooperation in those sectors where it's very difficult to mobilize the private sector and where the private sector will come. Because we need to think in a package, no? And we like to think it as in the countries need to develop these national strategies on climate finance, identifying like what are the needs per sector. Because are completely different. If you go to the energy sector, the needs are totally different than in the agriculture sector. But it's very important because then you can assess these needs. How much do you need? How much do you have? And how to cut that gap. Sometimes we don't do that. And then obviously when we discuss with the GCF, with the adaptation fund, and it's, okay, how much do you need? Well, I'm just going to bring a number because I haven't done that exercise. And actually, the Standing Committee on Finance produced a report on needs, and we realized that in Latin America, these type of analyses haven't been conducted. Some countries have estimations in the mitigation side, but not so much in the adaptation side. And this is a huge opportunity in the updating process of the NDCs, the NAPs. It's important to bring this perspective about how much do we need, and then what are those mechanisms that would allow you to go to the ground? And this implies like not only different financial mechanisms, but also different mechanisms to access to those mechanisms. Like small farmers are finding extremely difficult to access. I'm not gonna even say the Green Climate Fund, because the Green Climate Fund requires a lot of effort, a lot of time to be accessed. But how can we create like national funds, national structures that can help us to put those, like to bring those resources in the ground? So I think it's the big opportunity that we have here is create these strategies. But then another challenge, but as well as a good opportunity, is to think differently the approach. Because we are not only talking about reduction of emissions or even reduction of vulnerability. In all our countries, it's all about protection of biodiversity as well, reduction of poverty. So our strategies are not necessarily solely in the climate kind of perspective, but how can we collaborate and create these more integral strategies in collaboration with the private sector to generate more jobs, different jobs, long-standing jobs, sustainable jobs, and then reactivate our economies differently. For instance, Ecuador and Colombia and other countries are thinking in this bioeconomy. And private sector is critical to achieve that, no? Like how to create those new ways to generate new industries, because we have to innovate here, no? We cannot continue in the same pathways. So how can we employ more people that protect the nature instead of penalizing through these incentives, no? So I think this is the opportunity to rethink the structure, and what the global stock is telling us is that we are failing badly in the way that we are structuring the climate challenge, and that we have the opportunity to rethink the strategies at the national level, particularly at the local level, and really think in the connection between the different agendas, not try to separate bio from climate, from sustainable development, but most importantly for us is social well-being and the reduction of poverty and generation of jobs, and I think that's the critical challenge. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sandra. It's certainly true, especially in a region like ours, where there's 16 million smallholder producers that produce a large majority of the food, and it's not easy to get out to all of them and affect change at a really rapid scale in agriculture. You made some really good points about, broader engagement in the design process, lack of costed implementation plans, for the NDCs that define how to use different financial mechanisms to pay for each. What can the public sector do? What needs to be done on a grant basis, and how can you use those grants to unlock greater finance from the private sector? So, and I think that's a good point. As there's been a real learning curve with the design of the NDCs and the processes to get there. And I think the INDCs maybe didn't have the full participation that was really needed. And the quality of the information there wasn't as robust as it needs to be to really turn those strategies into action. And if we do want others to really have ownership of that and help implement, they need to be participating in these processes and see how they contribute. And so, Natasha, actually, that's a question I had for you. Does BEAR link in specifically to the NDCs in certain countries? Do you try to identify the goals that the countries have and then, try to communicate or coordinate to make sure that your actions fit in there? And have you been consulted in any of the NDC processes in the region?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And as you were speaking, I was having some ideas in my mind because, yeah, you were spot on. From a private sector point of view, of course, and I just briefed my board of management, what are NDCs, explain why it's important, and we need to be engaged as private sector where we can and where it makes sense. But for us, there are two things here. From a food and agriculture point of view, it's so complex, right? You need to combine so many different policies. We are talking, my focus, of course, is on innovation, on technology, and how I deploy and prove that those technologies are critical for climate adaptation, for example, that we need to talk more, that we need to really have a pathway and a clear strategy on countries. How I can talk about a system that can really contribute to climate mitigation. For example, we are working very close to the Indian government in India on this directed seed rice transformation on massive reduction of methane emissions in the rice systems in India. So we are working with them directly as they develop their local policies. We are working with the current government as well, looking at agriculture as a sector and partnering with Embrapa on developing tools for tropical agriculture. So for us, where we have large investment and where we see we can be a systemic contributor to the improved resilience, but as well to climate mitigation in agriculture, we are engaging and we are directly sharing our thinking and our results and our partnership results with those governments. We would like, as a private sector, to see it integrated, to see it faster, and to see it comprehensive enough, because that will really unlock investment from a private sector. Then you can have, we are discussing about 10, 50, for a technology from a seeds or the types of technology that we have, for them to be in the market, it takes 10, 15, 20 years from now. So when I'm thinking about my R&D and when I'm thinking about countries, smallholder countries, we have 100 million empowerment target that I need to deliver in 2030. But then when I look at those smallholder markets, where am I going to put my investment? I am looking at the NDCs and saying, okay, which countries are going to incentivize and which countries are really serious about that climate mitigation and adaptation pathway, and I'll put my bets on there. And then I'll attract partners to come with me and share risk across the value chain, and then think about designing public-private partnership. And we are all doing that. So I think the NDCs are the North Star from a private sector as well. Of course, we are engaging and trying to raise awareness as in the places that we can.
Fantastic. No, it's an excellent point how sometimes we need kind of translators to put the same thing in different languages, to talk to your executives, to talk to the local and traditional farmers that the minister mentioned, or to talk to, others in the sector, to make sure that agriculture can be a full part and food systems can be a part of the response. Sandra, can you tell us, do you have an example in the region of a country that has really costed this out specifically for, the agriculture, food, or water, and, give us a good example you've seen of that?
Yes, I think, I mean, there are a lot of countries that are including like agriculture and food systems in their NDCs, but I think the cases, for instance, Colombia has been doing a very interesting exercise to identify not only the critical actions on the agriculture sector, both for adaptation and mitigation, and actually is the only country that has been trying to kind of assess in a very deep way the actual cost, no, of that. And the challenge is huge, and I'm not going to simplify, like, because it's actually huge. But I think it's a good opportunity also to for us as an organization that has been tracking the financial flows. Is always this is the funny part, no? Like when you go with the financial sector, they tell us that there are trillions out there ready to be invested and deployed, but there are not projects, no? And then you go with the developers at the small, medium, large scale, and it's like, no, we have thousands of projects, but we cannot access to those trillions. And I always say this because it's true. There is a massive disconnection. So one of the things that I see is when countries present pipelines in a more articulated way, it's easier for them to access to resources. And I have seen this not only in the context, for instance, the GCF is looking more and more for those pipelines that are more well designed with critical indicators. And I think this is, for instance, working with the Colombian government, they have a guide, no? Like, for instance, to say, okay, what are the needs or what are the key priorities in the agriculture sector? And that has been helping them a lot to at least characterize where to go. Lots of other exercises or examples in terms of how to start identifying those needs, but not as in the costing area quite yet. And I would like just to emphasize something that we are also following a lot the discussions at the international level in the context of the financial reform, no? The World Bank and other mechanisms, because at the end of the day, it is true that we have to mobilize like a big amount of money. And one of the elements is true that we need to also keep like engaging these entities to understand the needs to the local. And the World Bank and a lot of institutions, they cannot think in small grants or a small level. They think in this massive amount of money, and this has to change as well. No, it's not only put more burden on the governments. I mean, it's true that they need more fiscal space to work on this, and they need to change the financial flows at the national level, but it's also important like to transform the way that these entities operate, the World Bank, the MDBs, that sometimes for them it's very impossible to deploy like money to the scale that is significant and transformative in the ground. So I think this is important. That's why it's important to think in the whole financial system transformation and not only in one bit. And agriculture and food security is one of those critical sectors that will require this transformation in different sizes of money at different levels. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not necessarily just the amount, but how you direct it and make sure it gets to the right place at the right time at the moment that it's needed.
Oh, sorry, the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund.
The Green
So actually, the Colombia government designed a methodology, like to define what priorities do they have to be able to decide what projects should be presented in the context of the Green Climate Fund.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time now to maybe take a question from our audience before I give one last word to the panelists.
Thank you so much for this session. I am Juhi from the RCC Asia Pacific, kind of working with the UNFCCC Secretariat on these issues. And I'm so grateful to hear interventions from the panelists, especially on India, and because Asia Pacific is a similar region in terms of its agricultural importance, in terms of resilience, but also very high GHG emissions. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of your collaboration potential, because I'm seeing that the private sector is now looking at NDCs of countries, but how, from the country perspectives, for example, can we look to leverage this in terms of streamlining the markets, looking at involvement of the private players in this field? How can countries themselves look towards integrating this more, just to smooth the process, to give the signal to banks, to multilateral institutions, to private players that they need to come in and ramp up this action, because there is a big, big gap in implementation of these kind of bankable projects. how can countries do more to involve them? And I'm sorry, I think you'll have to translate that maybe for Ecuador, and we can see.
Oh, was it specifically for him?
No, not specifically, but also in terms of what they want from countries. So it might be useful to hear.
La pregunta es que cómo los países están hacer un involucramiento, porque dados los diferentes gaps, cómo están dando procesos de, pues de, sí.
Okay, I understand now. Te voy a dar un ejemplo. En el Ecuador trabajamos en la provincia del Oro, en el sur del Ecuador, con una cadena de farmacias que se llaman Farmamía. Particularmente hablamos con el dueño de las farmacias y le dijimos una estrategia para brindar salud desde la alimentación, de una forma sostenible y orgánica. Entonces hablamos con todas las mujeres rurales de todo el sector para tener una producción semanal de estos productos orgánicos. Y con eso logramos que él en sus farmacias corra las perchas de medicina y la mitad se hizo un supermercado orgánico. Esa fue una alianza pública-privada, una ¿no? APP. Entonces, con esto logramos en ese ejemplo ese involucramiento, ¿no? Y todas las semanas se da un alimento sano, sostenible, cero emisión de carbono, porque estamos disminuyendo totalmente la movilización de las materias primas, sino que es directamente la vinculación de la mata a la mesa.
He gave an example from the province of Loro, where they worked with a pharmacy chain to try to provide greater health through greater nutrition and health through food. And so they worked with women to produce organic products and then deliver directly to the pharmacies. And then the pharmacy opened up like a grocery store in half of the pharmacy so that the people had better access to fresh produce that was also reducing the greenhouse gas footprint, because it was a reduction in agrochemical use on the farm and then also a reduction in the transport costs. And they were, going directly from the farmer to this market and making it more available for the people in the province.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm not government, but I think we need a few things to make it fast and scalable. It's the catalytic finance to get things moving, and from development organizations, right, the World Bank and others. We need, as a value chain, private sector. That's why my conversation with the off-takers of produce is really important. We need to share risk. We cannot put all the risk. We all know the farmer cannot afford to have all the risk, but then how you share risk and how you design that with the right, there isn't even perfect crop insurance for certain changes that we want to do, and we have been talking in India a lot about that. So we need to have real, never ever thought collaboration, and we need to design. I'm talking with insurance companies to design and use the data that we have on field to design insurance products, to test with the farmers to see if it works, so we can accelerate that change. And then governments come in, and I like it's just so massive, the work that we're doing in India, so I use it as an example a lot. But the government came in, and we have been talking about subsidies, right? Water is free in India, even on water scarce areas. We have been designing the projects in a way that together with them, that fits their pathway, that maybe they can use in their own targets. And they are coming in with capacity building with, India is very diverse, right? So I'm not going to go into details, but capacity building, validating some of those design, thinking how to incorporate in their national policy. So it's a real, it's a, I think okay, I was like, it's over, the time is up. They cut my mic. So I think the openness and the candid conversation that we are having in certain countries, Brazil as well, in Mexico, with certain extent in Colombia as well. So that openness is helping us to design things that can be scalable. So I think, I know private sector can do much more, and I understand, but we are trying, and I think that openness is what we need. And the capabilities in the government as well, right? People that understand that is really important. So, so that's my contribution. But thank you for being here. Asia Pacific is really, really important on this transition as well.
One very concrete thing Ecuador has done actually is open up in an online portal a space where different actors from the country can make a suggestion of how they can contribute to the NDC so they can start to map better what is going on in the country and what they'll actually be able to intake and to take into account for their next NDC round.
I just want to say something very quickly. I think it is very interesting to think not only in the alliances that can happen at the project level, but also the incentives that you can create through policies. I'm from Mexico, and for instance, what happened in Mexico is that the agriculture sector is kind of trying to transform the policies from a sustainable approach. However, we have a lot of subsidies in practices that are like not good, like this is in agriculture and in energy. So the subsidies, subsidizing practices that are the opposite in terms of sustainability also desensitize the private sector to say, oh, I would like to go that way. But if you are subsidizing activities that are not that are creating the negative, so that's also something that is not good. And again, for instance, I've seen this in agriculture and in the energy sector. So I think it's important not only put more policies and incentives to these technologies, but also reduce those like bad subsidies or perverse incentives that are creating the opposite effect.
Okay, we're out of time, so I just wanted to give, if everybody wants to give one last tweet-like message, we can maybe start with
Yeah, okay. Well, very quick, I think I will segue for my closing remarks. I think we need to incentivize the outcomes, right? So we need to kind of align, as I said, many trade-offs, but we need to align on those outcomes and then validate the practices that will lead us to those positive outcomes. And out of ideology, we need to get the right scientific partners in, and together with the governments, incentivize those outcomes that are, reduction of input use, water optimization, reduction of emissions, biodiverse preservation, and restoration. So we need to have that as a pathway, and then you're going to have the technologies and the projects to deliver on those outcomes. And never forget, well, I hope most of you work in food and ag, but those are people's, these livelihoods. We're talking about billions and billions of farmers that we all are telling them and pressuring them and saying, oh, it's really, really bad, and you are impacting all of, but they need to survive, and that's important for their livelihood. So the transition is to have that human component, and needs to have the right, we need to create that economic development and well-being, because those are people, right? So we need to be careful when we force things, and then we have the outcomes that maybe we don't want. So let's do the just transition, right? So thank you.
Minister, do you have any?
Bueno, yo pienso que este tema es muy importante porque es la única forma de salir adelante e incentivar a los gobiernos locales y a los gobiernos nacionales por medio de la empresa privada. La empresa privada generalmente ve los números, y yo he sido siempre de la empresa privada. Soy agricultor también, soy agricultor orgánico, y necesitamos que los gobiernos estén totalmente articulados, el nacional y el local, con la empresa privada para poder lograr estos incentivos y este cambio de paradigma hacia una sustentabilidad productiva.
This is a really fundamental topic. The private sector really is about the numbers. He said he's comes from the private sector himself. I'm an organic producer, and we really need these clear messages from the government to achieve this change in paradigm for the sector. Sandra.
Well, thank you so much. I just two very quick points. One, there is no one single bullet. We need to think in the package and what are the needs of the different stakeholders in the agriculture sector, because are very different. And the second is very important, the collaboration. Like from the political side, the policy cycle and the instruments are critical. The messages from the private sector, but also the engagement of the local people and local communities are critical in this. And at the end of the day, food security is our survival element here. So I think it's very important to connect the agendas, water, agriculture, climate, biodiversity, because at the end of the day, we are all connected. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So there you have it. That's certainly a conversation that needs to continue. We do need to reduce this finance gap We need to increase innovation and technical knowledge, and these are really key roles for the private sector to help contribute to these public policy groups. We heard that there's no silver bullet. We need better alignment. We need to share the risk and provide the right incentives for this private sector engagement. And of course, keep in mind that at least in food and agriculture, it's really about the farmer and the peoples whose livelihoods are being affected. Thank you again to all our fantastic panelists, and of course to the UNFCCC, and in particular the Regional Collaboration Center for organizing this event and broaching this conversation. We've had over 150 countries signed the Food and Agriculture Declaration. We've had over 550 events on agriculture at this COP. So now is the time, and really looking forward to finding a way forward together. Thank you.